Good day, everyone, and welcome to this dive-in segment we'll be covering today, titled Bias in Risk Selection, which I do feel is an underexplored area in D&I. I'm Trevor Gandy, your host today. I currently serve as Managing Director, Talent, Diversity, and Inclusion at Markel, and we have a great set of panelists who are going to bring a lot of perspective and critical information to the audience. And why don't we begin with introductions and ask our panelists to not only speak about what they're doing now, but why they're passionate about this topic. And we'll begin with Roosevelt.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to spend some time with you today talking about this very important issue. My name is Roosevelt Mosley. I'm a principal and consulting actuary with Pinnacle Actuarial Resources. I've been in the property and casualty insurance space now for a little over 27 years, working both as an actuary for a company and then consulting with a number of insurance companies over my consulting career. I'm passionate about this particular issue for a couple of reasons. One, as an actuary by trade, one of the things that we're taught as actuaries is that numbers are king. And when you analyze the numbers and the numbers tell you something is true, you tend to believe it. One of the things that we've also understood over the years is that everything that we analyze is predicated on the data and the information that we are fed. And to the extent that there are challenges with the data, challenges with the information that we have, that could potentially challenge the results of any analyses that we do. And so as we've progressed and understood more about this particular issue and understood more about the potential for bias in rating and in analytics and underwriting, the covers are coming off, and we're getting a chance now to dig deeper and explore what really are the issues and how we potentially address any issues that we uncover. So happy to be with you and happy to looking forward to the conversation that we have today.
Thank you. And now, Sonia.
Again, thank you for having me today. It's an exciting opportunity to work with Dive-In and all that you've done over the last 9 years. I have over 40 years of experience in the property casualty insurance business and have a unique experience in that I've worked in the industry, running underwriting departments, working for the California legislature as chief consultant on insurance to then Speaker Willie L. Brown Jr. I have worked as a lobbyist for the insurance industry, then also worked with the NAIC as part of their consumer organization, as a member of their consumer board of trustees, and a consumer representative. I've also had the opportunity to testify before Congress on insurance issues, especially on the issue of big data, and literally work with every commissioner in the country over the last 10 years. I look forward to the opportunity to have this discussion today and to continue to work with Dive-In in the future with their endeavors and their issues regarding diversity and inclusion in the insurance industry.
Great, thank you. And Chris.
Thank you very much. I'm Chris Bailing. I lead the life and health business for Swiss Re in the Americas, and I own our global mortality portfolio. But I also lead our life and health sustainability initiative. And what that means is it's helping to chip away at the $25 trillion life insurance protection gap in this country. That's a $25 trillion unmet need of American families. And that protection gap is disproportionately made up. People of color, of low-income individuals, and members of socioeconomic classes that the life insurance industry hasn't served very well over its history. And the key to chipping away at this is, as we say, the 3 A's, making these products available, affordable, and accessible to socioeconomic classes that we haven't reached. And part of that is going to depend on how well we implement digital and data strategies. But at the same time, if those digital and data strategies have bias in them, we run the risk of undoing the very thing we're trying to do. And that's why I'm personally passionate about what we're going to talk about today.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for the introductions. And maybe, Chris, we'll build on some of the comments you were making. To start, a question for each of our panelists. How does access to insurance impact the larger society?
So, when I think about life insurance, it's about helping families carry on when tragic events happen. It's about being able to see that child go to college if you're not there to support them. It's about paying off that mortgage. It's about fulfilling the American dream. And when we think about low income, underserved socioeconomic classes, they don't have the momentum that others do. And life insurance protection is a way to create that momentum and allow the next generation to build from the previous generation. Yet it's oftentimes the market that we don't serve that well. I think about 9/11, and I think about the checks that our industry delivered to families in need. But then I think about how that was disproportionately delivered to higher income white Americans. And so for me, we've got to expand that noble purpose of our industry to more segments of society.
And Sonia Roosevelt, any additional thoughts?
Well, just as Chris said, insurance is the very foundation of financial stability in this country. Everything you do, from driving an automobile to purchasing a home or a condo, is underwritten by that ability to have insurance. Without it, you cannot operate a motor vehicle legally in 48 states in this country. No one's going to give you a mortgage without your ability to purchase insurance. And as a parent, the first thing I said to my son when he was engaged in planning a wedding was to buy life insurance to protect his family in the future. So insurance is part of a lifestyle that you need to build on if you are going to achieve, as Chris said, a part of that American dream.
Absolutely, and if you think about the access that having products around like insurance provides, now that I can operate a vehicle legally and also without fear that if something happens, I'm not going to be liable and lose everything that I have. Being part of the American dream of home ownership and not just having that piece of the American dream, but also participating in the wealth building that home ownership is a part of, and that oftentimes so many in certain communities have been left out of. And so without insurance as that foundation, without that access to affordable insurance that's available to some of these communities, it becomes difficult to not just get your piece of the American dream, but also to pass on that wealth to generations to come.
Very good. And each of you, I believe, has touched on some of the challenges with access to insurance and how it's disproportionately impacting minority or otherwise socioeconomically challenged communities. But when speaking about evaluating risk, do you feel that the composition or life experience of the decision makers making those evaluations matters? And Roosevelt, we'll start with you.
Sure, and I think it certainly does matter. and I'll lean back on my actuarial background for a second. If all that matters is the numbers, or at least what the numbers say, the risk that I'm taking on, then I think it does a couple of things. It certainly has the potential to make insurance out of reach, unaffordable for certain communities, low income communities of color, or potentially maybe not necessarily out of reach, but it creates a situation where the insurance protection may not necessarily be adequate. And when those types of situations occur, if the those that are making the decisions don't have access to uh, uh, people that understand those environments, people that maybe come from those particular situations. It's sometimes easy to simply say that's what the numbers are and move on, without really trying to understand what some of the drivers are. As an example, why is it that oftentimes uh, insurance costs and the risks that are associated with insurance actually sometimes are higher in communities where the incomes and those that live there maybe aren't necessarily able to afford the higher rates. What's driving that, and what can we do to potentially address some of the drivers of the higher costs? Is it infrastructure? Is it for thinking of auto insurance, is it the infrastructure of the roads? Is there something that is happening that's creating a situation that's more risky? And how do we potentially begin to address those underlying issues, rather than just stopping at the answer that says it costs so much because the risk is so high? And so having folks around the table uh, discussing those issues and willing to ask the harder questions, or at least put some of those answers in better perspective, I think is important as we really try to grapple with this issue.
Chris, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Roosevelt nailed the first one I was going to say. I think that diversity within our own companies matters for three reasons. The first is what Roosevelt said, which is how can we even understand unconscious bias if we are a homogenous group of people who are all reinforcing one another's unconscious bias? The second is we need to look like the communities we're trying to serve to understand the needs of those communities. And I'm not sure we manufacture products and offer them in a way that is going to drive more access, because we're looking at it through a specific lens. And third is we need that change from within. We need that understanding of why this is so important. I think for a long time we've made products in a certain way for a certain community that does not resonate with large parts of the society.
Great, thank you. And Sonia.
Well, when this all started, the discussion last year, there were two insurance industry CEOs who spoke out on this very issue. And I'm just going to quote what two of them said. When evaluating risk, Jack Swizell, CEO of American Family, said this after the death of George Floyd. He said, "This is the latest example of a broken society, fueled, I should say, by a variety of factors, but all connected by inherent bias and systematic racism. Society must take action on multiple levels and in new ways. It also requires people of privilege, white people, to stand up for and without our communities. We will never have, or we have never had before. We have to look at the issues differently." But more importantly, this CDC Dr. Rochelle Walensky, had some comments on this issue. And what she said was so telling and understanding what happens in our urban communities in America. And if you don't understand those communities, you'd understand that what she said was what we know is this: racism is a serious public health threat that directly affects the health of our entire nation. Racism is not just the discrimination against one group based on the color of their skin or their race or ethnicity, but the structural barriers that impact where they live, where they work, where their children play, and determinants of health and life. Long negative impacts on communities of color need to change. And as I look at this, I say leadership of the insurance industry and the worldwide public need to understand and recognize the barriers that have been created for people who are forced to live in certain communities and have not been allowed the opportunities to move out of those communities or to grow even within those communities.
Thank you. And building on the thoughts you've each just shared, what are current challenges to traditional risk selection and underwriting? And Chris, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think we've created this problem ourselves. In life insurance over the past 20 years, there's been this push for what was called preferred underwriting, which was getting more and more information to get a cheaper and cheaper price at the very top of the market, where a 1% price difference is a big price difference. But as a result, we've made it so complicated to get a 1% price difference on a $300 a year policy, saves the consumer $3, but often makes it inaccessible to that community because of how complicated we've made it. And that's because it takes highly compensated intermediaries to navigate our complicated products and processes. And highly compensated intermediaries go where the money is. So the way we've complicated this process has driven a distribution approach, which was necessary, which then limits access and availability to large parts of our society. And so, believe it or not, I think simplification of this is at the core of the solution.
And Roosevelt or Sonia, any additional thoughts?
Yes. As you know, I look at this issue and it kind of goes with what Chris just said. The use of big data, unverifiable data that companies are buying from third parties that consumers have not seen, have no knowledge of, and can't even challenge what's being said about them. The use of credit score, which we all know is a point in time. You can have perfect credit today, and next month it can be in the toilet. We also know that education is another issue. We have yet in America to address problems in our public schools. There's a wonderful article in the New York Times yesterday, September 7th, that talks about have served millions of American children, black and white. They have no access to broadband. They have books that are old and outdated. And yet the insurance industry uses education and whether or not you are a college graduate as one of their standards for underwriting and rating. We have to take a look at these and say what type of unintentional biases in underwriting and rating have these created when it's not the fault of the individual? A plumber can be just as good of an individual as a person with a PhD who's a college professor. And everybody doesn't choose to go to college or need to be in college. So I think we need to say to the insurance industry, stop looking at what you think is good and look at the individual and evaluate them. And I will say that as an old underwriter, and I came into this business when we didn't have big data, we didn't have credit score, we didn't look at education, we only looked at risky job types. We looked at more stability, job stability, resident stability, where you drove your car, how you used your car, not using data that you don't even know exist about yourself. And I think the other issue that concerns me is this use of criminal profiles, data that these third-party aggregators are providing. Again, it's not based on conviction, but may be based upon a false arrest. And if you want to know about that, read the Ferguson report that the Justice Department put out regarding the police abuses that took place with people that lived in that town. So as I look at it, I say that the NAIC, departments of insurance across the country have to get a hold of these underwriting factors and rating factors and really take a look at them and say, are they valid? What are they causing or costing individuals?
Very good. Thank you. And Roosevelt, I'm going to transition to the next question, but start with you, given our remaining time. And I want to move us to your thoughts, given your perspectives on solutions and recommendations. So Roosevelt, as a start, what are potentially the new criteria and or decision-making actions that could mitigate bias in risk selection?
Sure. And to answer that, I want to sort of tie in what Chris and Sonia both have said, because I think what they both have said is vitally important. As an actuary, and so I'll maybe keep coming back to that to try and talk about how the perspective has transitioned. But as an actuary, one of the things that we have always been concerned about or focused on is this idea of understanding the underlying risk and then being able to manage that risk appropriately. And so one of the reasons that is vitally important is that if you look back in property and casualty insurance company history, there are lots of companies that didn't make it because someone didn't really understand the risk that they were taking on. And as a result, those companies, they didn't succeed. A fundamental fact of insurance is that if you as a company are not taking in enough money to satisfy the obligations that you've committed yourself to, then that doesn't, the economics of that just doesn't work. Over my career, one of the things I've seen, and I've seen it pretty significantly in P&C insurance, and Chris alluded to this on the life side as well, is that there's this race. Race is not strong enough of a word, but it's the best word I can come up with right now. But there's this race to try and identify who those quote unquote best risks are. And for a lot of companies, the idea of best in insurance is low frequency. So the lower likelihood of claims translates to best, and those are the risks that a lot of P&C companies go after. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're profitable, doesn't necessarily mean that you can make money on them. It's just been the definition of best. So in order to do that, there have been a number of things that have been incorporated to to get better at identifying risks. Sonia alluded to a number of them. I could add 24 additional things to that list of ways that companies have tried to segment that risk. As we've gone down that path, the goal has been to try and figure out how to do all of this, but do it in a way that is faster and cheaper and less expensive. And so thus the rise of big data, more automation, and ways to try and streamline a lot of those processes. Well, in that process, I think a lot of what we're coming to understand is that the big data in and of itself isn't bad. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, in and of itself, none of that stuff is bad. It's what it's applied to. Sometimes it's who's the person doing the application, but the right tools in the wrong hands can lead to disastrous consequences. So what we're now getting to, and this transitions to the answer to your question is, uh, so for so long, and I think rightfully so, we've been focused on the risks that we've been undertaking. But now the question is, okay, there's a balance that we have to draw here. It's not just about making sure that we understand and can price for the risk we're undertaking, but we've got to do that in a way that is not disproportionately impacting certain communities or certain people of color or other marginalized communities. And so the things that are now being talked about and discussed are, what are the ways, the right approaches within a big data framework or otherwise, that one will help us identify where this bias really is, because there are lots of theories, there are lots of people talking about, well, it's this particular factor, it's this particular issue. But what I think we really need to do is look at it more globally and say there could be a number of things that are impacting this issue. So first is, let's identify them. Let's figure out exactly where the problems are. And then I think from a place of that knowledge, we can identify the right solutions to address the issues. Sometimes I think we, as an insurance community, jump too quickly to, well, we think this is the right solution, without really identifying whether that solution will actually fix anything or not, or just exacerbate the issue. So there are a number of techniques that have been built up within the machine learning community and AI. There are a number of things that are happening in terms of regulatory oversight in terms of the NAIC and other legislators that are being put in place. And I think ultimately this will get us to a place where we're balancing the need for risk-based pricing underwriting with the need for making sure that we're doing things that aren't unintentionally biasing other communities.
Well said.
You know,
Thank you.
Trevor, if I could add to that, I think the conversation would benefit. So what should we do? It should benefit from a little more texture. And what I mean by that is, there can be biased data sets, there can be biased data sources, and there can be biased data scores. And we tend to conflate all of these things together. And if we can just start by rooting out the biased data sets and then the biased data sources, then we're a long way to rooting out much of the problem that exists in big data. Because I don't know how we test algorithms for bias when the data sets and the data sources that we're using within those algorithms are in and of themselves biased. So for me, it's adding more texture to this discussion so that we can really get at the issues of sets, sources, and scores.
And let me challenge both of you on that, because here in Connecticut, our commissioner, Andrew Mice, put together some technical groups of individuals, predominantly insurance industry personnel, with the exception of me, even though I am not currently an insurance industry employee. I'm a prior one. And he asked all of us to take on different aspects of technology in the insurance business. I was given the task of chairing the technology task force on big data. My task force consisted of industry people, people who were in charge of data security and data within their large corporate structures, an actual data provider, but who had worked in the insurance industry. And I want to tell you, we were attacked like you wouldn't believe by companies within the insurance industry. Our goal was not to shut down the use of big data, but to give the regulator the opportunity to take a look at those data sets. I was personally attacked, and we couldn't understand why. All of our calls, our meetings were public under Public Information Act in Connecticut. I had insurance industry lawyers come onto our calls and identify themselves as someone other than who they were and who they worked for. It was so upsetting because anyone knows you can Google a name and find a person. But the industry was so disingenuous. Instead of engaging in the conversation with us, they personally attacked us. What we were trying to do was not, again, shut down the use of data. I understand the need of it. And so did everyone on our team. Yet the industry attempted at every step to undermine us. The Department of Insurance in Connecticut adopted every one of our recommendations. And the biggest part of that recommendation was to give the department access to the information so they could make the judgment call regarding the use and the validity of the data. We continue to see, as the NAIC has moved forward in this area, to look at the issues regarding affordability and accessibility of insurance to all of our communities. The industry digging their heels in the ground and refusing to have an open conversation, forgetting about old biases, the old reports, the old studies. If I see one more industry report from 1998 talking about urban communities, instead of coming to the table and saying, we have a challenge, we've got to figure out a way to make it work. We know we can do it. But what we have, and I've said this publicly before, are the talking heads defending old practices and old ways. The industry has yet to put on the table a new idea and a new concept. They have yet to bring their CEOs to the table to talk to commissioners. What they're forcing commissioners to do are going to be big data calls. They're going to cost a lot of money and take a lot of time versus coming to the table and talking. There has been one trade association that has said, we're going to work with you, ACLI. The rest have defended past practices and old studies. And I don't know how we get them to drop their past histories and talk to commissioners about our next steps and how we move forward. You know, there are a lot of new small companies who come to the table. There are a lot of new ideas that are out there, and the industry has to be willing to talk about them and talk with commissioners and consumers. But more importantly, if there are problems, educate consumers in those communities about the challenges they bring to the table. We see this in Boston with a small organization that is helping with home ownership. You have two insurance companies in Boston that are working with these homeowners and this organization to help consumers understand how to prevent homeowners loss. Why can't we do the same on every aspect of insurance? It's starting the conversation. That's all.
Thank you. And each of you have laid out steps that could be taken, but maybe in just a short round of responses, if we were sitting on this panel 2 years from now, what degree of optimism do you have that the steps will be taken in a substantive way? We'll start with Roosevelt.
So I am an eternal optimist, and so my answer is going to be optimistic, and here's why. I don't just necessarily have my head in the sand, but and I'll actually build on what Sonia described. I've had the opportunity over the last 18 months, feels like longer than that, but the last 18 months or so, to talk to a lot of different audiences regarding this issue. I've talked to trade associations. I've talked to individual insurance companies, a number of them. I've spoken in actuarial venues. I've testified before legislators, regulators regarding this issue. And here's why I still remain optimistic. First, I think, and I will be the first to agree that in talking even to trade associations and insurance companies, there are times when I get off of those meetings and I may go find a wall and bang my head a couple times. And part of that is because I do hear a lot of, well, I won't say a lot of, I sometimes hear some of the same things. However, I think I'm hearing more of a prevailing thought as we've talked about this more, that if we continue as an industry to simply rely on the traditional responses to this issue, then we are going to be completely unhappy. Well, maybe not completely, but somewhat unhappy with with the ultimate results. Companies are sitting up and taking notice and listening more. They're willing to talk through this issue more, and they're willing to talk about approaches and solutions to addressing this issue. And one of the charges that I've left just about every audience I've talked to about this issue is look, we've got an opportunity now to come to the table and to help be a part of the solution to some of these issues. If we don't take that opportunity, the last 18 months has shown me that I don't believe this issue is just going to go away. It's not going anywhere. And so if we don't take the opportunity to be at the table, to be involved in coming up with the right solutions, I think where we end up is somewhere that legislators and or regulators end up pushing us, which may not necessarily be the places that we want to be. I followed and I've actually talked to a few people on the Connecticut Commission that Sonia was referring to earlier, and I believe the resolution that they came out with in terms of big data and how the regulators would be able to access, review that big data, make sure that it's not creating any issues. The solution that they came up with, I believe, was a reasonable one, and so at some point we're, as an industry, are going to have to realize that we've got to be at the table, we've got to be a part of the solution. And while at the end of the day, we may not necessarily love everything that comes out of this process, being at the table does give us a voice and does allow us to be a part of that solution. Otherwise, the answers are going to be forced on us, and generally those answers don't always end up being ones we like.
Chris, same question for you.
Yeah, I think that the very nature of our shrinking addressable market is going to force the life insurance industry to solve this problem. And let me be specific. For 15 or more years, our industry has sold fewer and fewer policies to older and older Americans at higher and higher face amounts. That's what created the protection gap. That's not sustainable. That trend has to be reversed. And last year, 2020, was the first year since I've been in the industry that policy counts went up and premium went down. And I think that the industry is saying, wow, it is possible. But then to Roosevelt's point, if we don't take the bias issue seriously, the regulators will come in and do it for us. That will be a hatchet, not a scalpel. And as a result, prices could go up and the protection gap could increase. So I think it's up to us to come to this solution, because growing our addressable market and the sustainability of our industry requires it. So that's where my optimism comes from.
And Sonia, for you to give us how you would gauge your sense of optimism for change.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, because you lost me for a minute. My internet went down here in Avon, Connecticut. I am like Roosevelt. I'm an optimist. I believe in the insurance industry. I believe that this industry has the capacity, it has the people, it can make it work for all. I think that the industry has gotten too in tune to a return on equity versus recognizing that every piece of business is not going to be a 20% ROE. Now we're going to see some fluctuation in that some are going to be up there, some are going to be down there. But I think that if we want to, we will, and we can. And I just think rather than, as Chris said, have the government do it for us, we will do it for ourselves. We'll do it for the public because we're missing out on so many opportunities with consumers. We're missing out on the goodwill that comes with it. We're missing out on on having the government overregulate us if we don't do it ourselves. And so what I mean by that is not if we don't go in and solve our own problems, if we don't educate consumers as to why there are challenges in certain parts of this country, if we don't look for ways to lower the risk in all of our communities, whether they be communities of colors or not, if we don't modify our products so that they're available to everyone, we lose out. It won't be just losing or seeing a reduction in premium. It'll be losing that business to government-run entities. We're seeing it in California where companies are forced to take business out of the FAIR Plan because of issues with fire coverage and other lines of business. We're seeing it across this country, and we can avoid it if we want to, if we put our heads together and we push the pencil and the paper to solve our own problems. And there are problems. They're not just the country's problems. There are problems too if we start to lose that business, which we can develop and grow. So I believe we can. I believe we will. And I believe the NAIC is going to help us if we sit down at the table and talk to them, not talk at them or around them.
Great, thank you. And we come to our final question for the panelists. You know, we have several hundred individuals who have registered for this course, and I'm going to assume it's because they're not only interested and want to be informed and educated, but they're probably contemplating actions they can take to help make a difference. And so the final question for each of you, what is one action you would recommend to any of our guests who want to be part of moving our industry forward on this topic? Start with Roosevelt.
Sure. So one action that I think everyone can be a part of is being open to having those difficult, hard conversations. One of the challenges that I've seen as this issue comes up is that as soon as different sides of the issue begin talking at each other and they stop talking to each other, we've pretty much lost all hope for any productive conversation. I've been in meetings where there has been some productive discussions, and at some point in the meeting, folks realize that, hey, maybe we aren't as far apart on this particular issue as we think we are. I've seen the other side of the spectrum where the meeting devolves quickly with accusations and things that really don't have to do with the central issue being, end up being part of the discussion. And so I think it's going to require all of us to be willing to have those hard conversations and to be open to listening, not just being defensive, not just saying it's this way and it's my way and it has to be the right way, but really being open to those conversations. And when we're open to those conversations, it allows us to maybe hear things a little differently or maybe get some different perspectives. But it also allows the same on the other side, for our perspectives to maybe come across in a way that didn't necessarily come across before. I mentioned a number of the presentations and discussions I've had on this issue. One of my co-presenters in a number of those presentations has been Bernie Birnbaum of the Center for Economic Justice. And for those of you who know Bernie generally isn't an ally of the industry. But one of the things that I've come to respect about Bernie as we've had these discussions is that if he's nothing else, he's very thoughtful, he's very passionate. And when the lights have been off and we've had a chance to simply sit and talk with each other, what we realize is that it's easier to get to, I believe, a common ground and a common solution than maybe a lot of people think it is. And part of the reason I think that we have that difficulty is just people really aren't listening to each other anymore. They're dug into their particular views, and that's it. So be open to the hard conversations and be willing to listen.
Sonia.
There is a book that I recommend to everyone that you read as we talk about this issue. It's called High Conflict by Amanda Ripley. And for those of you who are interested in the discussion, you can't have the discussion if people who come to the table aren't willing to drop their past guards. You have to recognize that everybody has dug in their heels. And as Roosevelt said, when the lights go down, he can talk to Bernie. It shouldn't have to be when the lights go down. It should be when the lights are up. And High Conflict talks about how people get trapped in their positions. And it tells them how to get out of those positions, how you can come to the table, how you can have the conversation, and how you can move forward. And so I recommend that every young person, and you don't have to be young, but you're younger than me, on this, well, I am an old person, Roosevelt. I am proud to say that. Every person, read the book, and when you come to the table to have the conversation, you've dropped your guard. You come with your ears wide open to not only listen, but to learn. That's critical. As we learn more about each other, we learn to understand what our problems are, and we learn to move forward. And then one other thing that I'd like to mention that kind of dropped when I lost you guys for a moment was the need for all you young actuaries and mathematicians out there to read another book by two college professors out of University of Pennsylvania called The Ethical Algorithms. It doesn't say, and they don't say, that algorithms are bad, but there needs to be some ethics around the use of algorithms and some monitoring of them, along with the big data that is used to develop them. So if the young folks or the people who are listening to this can take those two issues, one, understand how conflict gets in the way of the discussion, and two, understand why ethics and regulation is important as we move forward, I think there'll be a lot of progress on this issue when we come back together to talk about it in a year or two.
All right. And Chris, close us out.
Thank you very much. I would bet that everybody on this call is involved with some kind of digital or data project. I mean, we spend so much time on it. So my challenge is to ask yourself a simple question with every data or technology or digital project you're involved in. Does the value of what I'm doing accrue to the consumer, or does it accrue to the distributor or the carrier? And if we could stay focused on our digital and data transformation, the value accruing to the consumer, we will avoid many of the problems that are out there today. And so that would be my challenge to everybody on the call.
Wonderful. And I first want to thank our panelists. They not only brought perspective, but the depth. They were able to clearly reach into their repository of research and studies to back the points they've made. And for our guests today, we are going to be sending a compendium of some of the research articles they referenced, some of the books that were mentioned. So as a takeaway, you'll receive that information. I'd also say in the short time I've gotten to know these individuals, they're approachable. So, the Dive-In platform provides information with contact details. So if you do want to follow up and engage with them, I'm sure they'd be welcome to it. And for Dive-In, thank you for the continued focus on D&I in our industry. And really, as I said earlier, opening the aperture to topics like this, bias and risk selection. Thank you, everyone.